Number 1. Evan. When I was a sophomore in high school, I made a new friend. There was this kid named Evan, whose family had just moved in from out of state. His family was from Philadelphia, and they had just moved to our more rural community. It was the first time they had moved since Evan had been born, so he had to leave behind all of his friends that he had had all of his life. Also, not having ever moved before, he had never been in the position of trying to have to make new friends. I lived in an area where there wasn't a whole lot of moving in or moving out. So whenever a new kid came around, it was really difficult for them to make friends. Cliques were very well established by high school, and even a long time before that. So things were stacked up pretty badly against Evan from the beginning. Evan was also a bit different from the people in our area. He always wore black all the time. He would sit in the back of the classroom. He rarely talked to anyone, including teachers, when they asked him questions. About a month after Evan appeared at our school, he and I began talking. He approached me in lunch, and he began talking to me. We realized that we had a lot in common. The two of us then became really quick buddies. It didn't take long for the two of us to become fast and best friends, actually. When October that year came around, he and I decided to go camping. I liked camping more in the fall than in the summer. I sometimes would go hunting too, but I didn't really go on trips to solely go hunting. But I liked being out in the wilderness when it was cooler outside and when the leaves were falling. There is just something about that time of year that I really enjoy. It's nicer to try and keep warm than it is to try and keep cool. So Evan and I took a long weekend in order to go camping. It was the Columbus Day weekend, and my school always made that into a 4-day weekend. They did parent and teacher conferences on Friday, so students didn't have to go to school. So after getting out of school on Thursday, Evan and I packed up, and we decided to head out into the country. Since it was October, we really didn't have a lot of daylight time before we had to set up our camp. We walked a bit into the dark, and then we used lights to set up our tent after we built our fire, of course. We had a good dinner and talked for a while before we decided to go to bed. Like I mentioned, I did enjoy casual hunting, so I had brought my rifle with me. It was by the opening of the tent. Evan and I shared the one large tent. We talked for a while before drifting off to sleep. The next day went really well. You know that one morning that seems to happen every fall? You wake up and you see that leaves from the trees finally decided to give up their leaves, which then began falling and gathering up on the ground. It was great and beautiful. We took ourselves much deeper into the woods and just had a completely fun time. The next evening went pretty much like the previous one. We had a good dinner, good camp and everything. Then the following day was pretty much the same. We didn't do any hunting really. It was all just hiking, enjoying nature and that sort of thing. The trip went fine, all the way into the last night. On Sunday night, we set up our last camp. Evan was acting like something was bothering him, but every time I tried to figure out what it was, he dismissed it. He insisted he was just tired, which was unfortunate because we went on this trip to relax and have fun. That night, I woke up when there seemed to be some light in the tent. I opened my eyes up, but like I normally sleep, I had a blanket wrapped around my eyes. It was thin enough to let some of the light through to wake me up though. Not knowing what was going on, I just decided to not indicate that I had woken up. I mean, as far as I knew, Evan had taken out some dirty magazines to read by lamplight and he was jerking off to them. I didn't want to embarrass him by immediately just looking out. I waited for a while, knowing that the light would not let me go back to sleep. but it had been on a long, long time, and the light was still on. So I decided that I would peek out from under my blanket and see what was happening. Okay, now I'm sure there will be people who hear this who will call me gay for peeking on my friend when I thought he was jerking off, but I dare a single one of you to deny that you have never looked at another naked guy in a locker room shower. We all do it, so let's not hear about that. I peeked out, and what I saw was not at all what I had expected to see. I saw Evan sitting in the corner of the tent with a flashlight on in my direction. That made it really difficult to see because of the light, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing. The light was only on me, nothing else. Suddenly the flashlight went off. I was worried that he had noticed that I had woke up and kept pretending to be asleep. After that, I waited to see if the flashlight would come back on, but it never did. It took a while, but I eventually went back to sleep. So the following day, things were back to normal again. We had a nice day for the last day, even though Evan seemed tired again, but it was a good trip. Evan and I did begin drifting apart after that. I was not sure why, but it just seemed like we didn't click as well as we did before. He began making other friends, and he spent much less time with me. The following spring, I was on Instant Messenger. Yep, this happened a while ago. And a guy I casually knew named Jim sent me a message. And I will never, ever forget the talk that I had with him that night. "Hey, Sean, you used to be friends with Evan, right?" he asked me. "Yeah, pretty good for a short while," I responded. "Why? Did you ever go camping with him last October?" "Yeah," I responded. I still did not see if this was important in any way. "Holy shit. He was gonna kill you," Jim told me. "What the hell?" I responded. Jim explained to me that Evan hangs out with his twin brother. They had recently been up late playing video games, and he overheard Evan telling his brother about a camping trip he went on with someone last October. He had only gone on the trip because he had the feeling for a while that he wanted to kill someone. It had been an urge he had been having for a while, and was one of the reasons his family had left Philadelphia. He had gotten into a few violent altercations with former friends of his. He further said that he met this guy in the new school and pretended to befriend him with the intent on eventually killing him. And that would have been me. I was a bit of a loner, and he figured it would be easier to get away with it if he killed somebody who didn't have a lot of friends. "Well, why didn't he do it?" I asked. He said the guy woke up. He had also brought a rifle with him for hunting, and it wasn't that far from where he could grab it quickly. So he aborted. I didn't know what to think of this story. It sounded so weird. I also didn't know why he would have told Jim's brother about it. But Jim told me his brother was a bit of a freak who was into death and serial killers. He actually had serial killer trading cards. I didn't even know those existed. So I have to wonder, did Evan really plan on killing me? I mean, he may have just been making up the story in order to impress someone who likes serial killers. But then again, he told the story exactly as it had happened. He told Jim's brother about staring at me for nearly an hour, trying to get up the nerve to finally do it. But when he noticed me peek out from under my blanket, he quit. It seemed awfully accurate. I'll never really know. I'm not friends with Evan, and I have no idea what even happened to him after high school. I went off to college in a different state, and I remained there. But I will always wonder what may have happened if I hadn't peeked out from under that blanket. I might be dead. Number 2. Writer. I have always wanted to write scary stories since I was younger. And although I think I am, and always have been, a very decent writer, I've never really been much of an idea guy. It's hard to think up new scary stories. And that's especially so when there are so many ideas and things that have already been done. I wanted to come up with new ideas, and not just do the same thing over and over again. There is a lot of rural area around where I live, and I guess that was one of the things that inspired me to be a horror writer. The woods, and even the fields, can be a really scary place, where you can come up with all sorts of terrifying happenings. And also, it gets a lot darker out in that area than it does in urban areas. I know that mostly because I live in a more urban area at the moment. But anyway, on with the story. This happened in the fall. I was still in high school at the time. That was the time when I was writing the most stories. And I guess that was why I was running out of inspiration. I was a bit underwhelmed by the beginning of the school year that year. I wasn't having a challenging time. So I was looking for something to get my mind going. Of course, I thought that writing a scary story would be the thing to do. The only problem was that I was having a really hard time thinking of an idea. About the third week of school, I was really blocked for ideas. I decided to go for a walk at night. Sometimes going for a walk is a really good way to get new ideas for scary stories. So I went out for a long walk. Now, I live on a country road myself, but I wasn't that far away from a small town, and there were some neighborhoods around. I walked down the road in the dark, just trying to get my mind to come up with something. I walked on down off the gravel road, and actually made it to the paved road. I figured ideas were not coming to me yet, so I might as well keep on going. I walked into a neighborhood that a friend of mine lived in. I wasn't intending on going over to his house, but I was familiar with the area, so I could walk up and down the streets, and I would not have to worry about getting lost. Right on the edge of that neighborhood was a really small woods, and there were some houses there. I want to try and explain this as well as possible, so you can understand exactly what the area looked like. The woods were on the right side of the street that I was walking on. On the left side were houses that were facing the road that bordered the neighborhood that I was walking in. There was another line of houses that were facing away from that direction. So these two rows of houses had their backyards facing each other. Now, there was an old paved road that ran behind and through both rows of houses. There were a lot of trees lined up and down on both sides of the street. Plus, there were no street lamps, and there was rarely any light from the moon either. It got very, very dark back there. I debated whether or not I wanted to walk through that area. I had walked through it before with my buddy, but never by myself at nighttime. But I told myself that it would be a good idea, because maybe I would get a little scared, and maybe being scared would be enough to give me inspiration for a scary story. However, I wasn't feeling particularly scared that night, and I doubted deliberately trying to make myself scared was going to be inspiring. However, there were some houses there that had some outside dogs. I wouldn't see them, and I thought at the very least I would get a good jump scare. So, I decided to walk down that area. When I first started walking down the street, I could still see the leaves that were falling off the trees behind the two houses. But as I walked just a little bit further, it gradually almost went completely pitch black. I am sure that most of you have watched horror movies. One of the things we do when we watch those movies is brace ourselves for possible jump scares. And that was exactly what I was doing. I tensed up, and I was waiting for it to happen. As I kept walking, I didn't hear any noise, other than the crunching of my own feet on the dead leaves on the ground. It was quiet, and I got tenser and tenser. I kept expecting the bark, but began getting apprehensive in expectation of it too. Even though I was hoping for a jump scare, I began to not really want it to happen. I think you all know the sort of feeling that I am trying to describe to you. The sound was nothing but a low grumbling sound, sort of like when a dog talks back to his owner, like he is mumbling under his breath, and that was it. I stopped walking. It was still dark, so I couldn't see the dog or much of anything, but I did look over in that direction that I had heard the dog make the sound. Really? I asked the dog. That is the scariest sound you could make?
When you strangle a dog, he can't bark at someone walking by.
I heard a voice from the direction of the dog tell me, and I experienced something much different than a jump scare just right then. It was something I hadn't experienced before, and I haven't experienced since. It was a wave of fear moving over my entire body. It was a cold dread. That is the only thing in my world I can think of could describe it. My legs reacted much quicker than my mind did, though. They picked up, and they began hauling butt down the street. The only thing I was thinking of was that I had to get to the end of this road and back into the light as quickly as possible. So I ran and almost tripped several times. I did not quit running until I got to a street lamp. At that point, I turned around and looked. I didn't see that anyone was coming after me. All I noticed was the trees covering the road and the leaves that were steadily falling from them. As before, it was completely quiet outside. I turned and began to go home. It took a while, but I calmed down. Now, I didn't get completely calm until I arrived home, and then I was still a bit on edge. But I guess I got what I was looking for. The funny thing is, this happened years in the past. I've written many scary stories and things since then, but never put the story down until now. Number 3. Car sleeping. I hope the story is long enough to be considered to be read. It's really short, and I'm not really the best writer. When I was 18, I had to move out of my parents' house. Or more realistically, I was kicked out of their house. I stayed at the houses of some friends here and there, but I burned a lot of bridges doing that. By the fall of that year, I actually was living in my car. However, it was hard to find places to park and be able to sleep all night. If I parked in a parking lot of a store or an apartment complex, I ran the risk of being found out, because I didn't have a parking permit for that sort of area. Well, I ended up driving out to this more rural area that was around where I lived. So I would park along the side of a dirt or rocky road in order to sleep. I was off the road enough to allow anyone to drive by, and cop cars and such never really ventured out on those roads, so I didn't have anything to worry about. I fell asleep in the backseat of my car, covered in blankets because it was somewhat cold outside, and it was normally very easy for me to fall asleep because I was always tired. When I woke up, it was because I heard a banging noise. Someone was banging on the window of my car. I thought it was a cop or something, so I looked out from under the blanket. It had been a damp day, and the leaves had been falling heavily. All of my windows were completely covered with leaves. I couldn't see who or what had pounded on my car. Whoever it was, though, kept pounding on my window. Not only that, they began shaking the car, and I heard some yelling. I wasn't able to tell what it was that the person out there was even saying to me. It sounded like gibberish. But he kept on hitting the window and then shaking the car. Not knowing what to do, I decided I had to get in the front seat of my car and get out of there as quickly as possible. I started the car and started up the windshield wipers. I wasn't able to see anyone right in front of the car, but the banging and shaking was still going on. It was blurry in front of the car, and then I pulled out anyway. I drove away, unable to look back and see who it was that had been attacking my car. The back window was so covered with leaves. I just drove away. In the direction I was facing, it drove me deeper into the hills, so that ended up being a very scary drive for me. It was just terrifying. It was so dark, and I was so scared to stop my car at any point to clean off the windows. Fortunately, I eventually found a way to a paved road without having to turn around and go back to where I'd parked. I drove to a friend's house, told him what happened, and he let me sleep there for the rest of the night. I never found out anything about what had happened that night. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you're all doing good during this whole COVID-19 thing. Thank you to everyone who has bought a Killer Orange Cat mask this year. We've actually sold many of them, so thank you very much. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. Please consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell below. We're waiting for the icon of Ichigo the cat. It will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.